In my last video, I made a Minecraft clone in Unity which included procedural voxel-based terrain generation, the ability to mine and place blocks, and some basic crafting and smelting mechanics. In this video, we're going to add to this to include a basic combat system and an artificially intelligent zombie to create a really challenging opponent. By the way, if you haven't seen the first video, check it out using the link in the description. And while you're there, why not also press that like and subscribe button too. My first task was to add health and hunger to the game. I started off by using my limited art skills to create some sprites for the UI. I initially made a full heart graphic and then grayed out parts of the image to show half and no health. I also made the graphics for the hunger bar and then added both sets of images to the game. Next, I created a generic script to manage the player's health and hunger and to update the UI to show any changes to these values. I also wrote some logic to heal the player if they have a full hunger bar and to slowly decrease the player's hunger over time. I then added a death screen and made it so that a player takes damage when they've got no food left, meaning that players can now starve. The next step was to add some hunting and eating mechanics to the game to prevent players from starving. To do this, I grabbed a pig and cow asset and added them to the game. I then created a mob spawning script to instantiate the pigs and cows around the player, and then worked on some basic animations for the animals using Unity's animation engine. To make the mobs interact with the environment, I worked on a mob movement script which allowed the mob to be in one of three states. Eating, where the mob stays still and plays the eating animation. Exploring, where the mob moves randomly around the map. And escaping, where the mob runs away from the player in random directions. After working on some steak and pork chop sprites, it was time to add the hit mechanics by using a raycast to detect if the player was looking at a mob when left clicking. If the player reduces the mob's health to 0, it drops some meat which can be consumed by the player. Let's make getting food more efficient by adding some weapons. First, I grabbed a sword model from Sketchfab and updated the game logic to allow different swords to affect the player's attack strength, meaning that a wooden sword can kill a pig in 3 hits compared to just a single hit with a diamond sword. I then added a sword swing animation to the UI to give some feedback that the player is attacking something. To give the player something more to attack than just pigs and cows, I decided that it was time to add the zombies. After importing a zombie model from Sketchfab, I set to work on adding idle, walking and fighting animations for it. I then added some basic movement controls for the zombie to make use of the animations and cause the player to take damage if the zombie touches the player and is in the attacking state. Next, I created a rotten flesh sprite and added some health logic to the zombie so that when it's killed, it drops rotten flesh. To make the zombies more challenging to fight against, I gave them a random chance of spawning with a sword, causing the player to take more damage when they're hit by a zombie. To make the combat system even more advanced, I decided to add a shield to both the player and zombie to add a defensive element to fights. After downloading a shield model and equipping the player and zombie with it, I added some basic blocking animations. As neither of the models contain elbow joints, the blocking animations didn't end up looking perfect, but still showed the action being taken. I then added the functionality to prevent any damage from being taken to the attacked character when they're blocking, and the job was done. The next step was to create an automated player to train the zombies against. I started by updating the mouse control script to look at the closest zombie to the player, and then added some logic to make the player walk towards that zombie. When a zombie is in range, the player mounts an attack, and at random intervals, it stops attacking and blocks to prevent any zombie attacks. Once the zombie's killed, it goes back to chasing after the next closest zombie. So, now it's time to work on creating the zombie AI. I'm using ML Agent's implementation of PPO to train the AI, which is the same tool that I used in my last AI video. As inputs to the network, I provide the distance to the player, the direction that the player is facing relative to the zombie, and whether the player is attacking or blocking. Player attacks take around half a second to cause damage to the zombie from when it's triggered, giving the AI a chance to block the player's attack. The zombie is able to move forward, left and right, and also attack and block. Jumping's handled automatically with some jump detection code that I wrote for the friendly mobs. The network is rewarded whenever it successfully hits the player and is punished whenever the zombie takes damage. There's also a small punishment for a zombie walking away from the player to incentivize it to be closer to the fight. So now that we understand the network setup, let's get to training. For the first few episodes, the AI's focus was to walk towards the player to avoid the small punishments for being too far away. By episode 95, the zombies were circling close to the player, and it took them until episode 205 to get close enough to be able to attack. Interestingly, the zombies have now picked up a swarming behaviour, whereby if the zombie can't touch the player because another agent's in the way, it moves around to behind the player to attack. This means that the zombies end up surrounding the player, making a more effective attack as not all of the zombies can be hit by the player at the same time. At the moment though, the zombies were struggling to use their attacks and blocks, meaning that the automated player was easily able to defeat the zombies. It took a long time for the AI to be able to attack and block effectively. We come back at episode 1500, where the AI understands to enter the block state when the player is looking at them and attacking, and to attack if the player is not looking at them. While the AI isn't doing this perfectly all of the time, let's take a look at how difficult the zombie is to fight. A single zombie doesn't appear to be too difficult to kill. Although it blocks a good chunk of the swings that I take at it, it often doesn't get close enough to the player to make any meaningful hit. However, when multiple zombies are attacking the player, things get much harder given the swarming behaviour that emerged from training. The zombies attacking from each side of the player makes it almost impossible to survive, meaning that I had to separate the horde to take down the zombies. So there we have it, we've now got a difficult zombie AI added to our Minecraft clone. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and comment on what video you'd like to see next.